Hello, I'm Laurie Williamson with Agriculture for Life. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Nourishing Minds, where we dig deeper into agriculture. Today, we are joined by Kathleen MacDonald, Operations Specialist with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Welcome and enjoy the conversation.
My name is Kathleen MacDonald, and I work for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency as an Operations Specialist. And the area I look after is Western Canada. So that's BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So as an operations specialist, I provide program policy and regulatory guidance to our inspectorate, as well as members of industry. My scope of expertise is the livestock feed program, as well as I help out with our plant health program. And as inquiries come in to me that start involving our food program, I will work horizontally with the other business lines to make sure that the entire scope of an issue is looked after.
Perfect. Excellent. So what does your day look like? There's probably no such thing as an average day, so especially during COVID, but what does a day look like? When you read your job description, you went, yes, this is what I want to do. What does a day look like for you?
Well, typically when there's questions come up about how regulations affect industry or how our inspections are applied to industry for the feed program, I work with the inspector to make sure that we've got a consistent application of that program across the Western area, as well as I network with colleagues in our Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic areas to, again, make sure we've got national consistency.
Perfect.
As with anything, there's always questions as to interpretation on policies, regulatory guidance. If industry themselves have questions, then often I'm the one that provides that guidance and advice while still keeping that frontline inspector involved. Now, I do also provide support to our plant health program as well with two other colleagues that work in my group. And we just kind of help organize and ensure that any issues regarding plant pests or regulated plant diseases are looked after and proceed in a consistent manner, and make sure information that comes from the regions to the area go up nationally, kind of thing.
And so that's quite interesting, actually, because as you know, I speak as a consumer a lot of times, having these wonderful conversations, and there's so many things that we don't really understand. And when we look at food and food production and agriculture, one of the most important thing, of course, for consumers is food safety. So when I buy my food, I want to understand that it's safe. And there is all of that policy and programs in place. So if we talk a little bit about livestock feed, how does livestock feed relate overall? So what does that mean?
Well, basically the feed program is looking after our food's food.
Okay.
So when the producers, so we've got our dairy producers, poultry, pork, beef. Whenever those producers are feeding their animals, we've got regulations that we take to the feed mills to make sure that they're manufacturing livestock feeds that are safe and efficacious for the intentions that they're being used for. And often with these big commercial productions, the easiest way to medicate animals is through their feed.
Okay.
So we we go through, and part of our inspections is to make sure that the commercial feed mills are mixing the medications in at the appropriate levels. So either they're meeting the levels that are indicated in what we call the compendium of medicated ingredient brochures, or it's being medicated as per a veterinary prescription. So a veterinarian has actually looked at the group of animals being medicated, and they've said, no, these animals need medication at this rate. And we make sure that the feed mills are manufacturing it to that specification. We also do inspections on farm to make sure that if they're mixing feeds on farm, again, medications are being mixed in a manner that is meeting the requirements of either, again, a veterinary prescription or the CMIB requirements. And as part of the medications, we also want to make sure that it's being manufactured in a manner that we're not creating a residue that's carrying over to a following feed where it might not be safe to be in there. Okay. So an example I can use is if we're medicating a group of animals with chlortetracycline, and we follow that feed with a dairy feed, any carryover into that dairy feed can result in residues to the milk.
Okay.
So part of our inspections and part of the reason for looking at commercial feed mills and on-farm manufacturers is to make sure that they've cleaned their system out beforehand, or they just don't use that type of a sequence in their feed manufacture, so we don't have those residues going into the food products.
Excellent, because I know that's a really important point that you raised, because a lot of people have concerns or are unfamiliar or don't know about sort of that transfer into their food. So our I like how you put it, our food, and then bringing it back as we consume. Making sure that what we're consuming is safe for us as well. And I think we've seen more and more conversation around that in the last many years around medicating animals and how that is done, and how it's sort of overseen, if you will. So who's got the sort of that jurisdiction of watching to make sure that as Canadians, our food is that high quality that we know and have come to expect. So that would be you. So now we know.
One of the other really important things that we look at is our enhanced feed ban as well, which is really important as part of our export program, and as part of our what we call the BSE status for Canada. So gosh, it was quite a few years ago now, I want to say that 10 to 20 years ago, where we had all the BSE, the mad cow disease in the news. And from that, we have the ruminant to ruminant feed ban, which we call the enhanced feed ban. So basically, we make sure that there is no feeding of any kind of ruminant material back to a ruminant animal. Okay. And that, so any ruminant meat and bone meal can only go to monogastrics. We can't feed that back to ruminant animals. So like sheep or goats or cattle are not being fed back to sheep, goats, or cattle. And we review a lot of that at the rendering facilities. So they take all the leftover parts from the slaughter process, and they will basically cook it down, remove the fat from it, and all the meaty parts and some of the bone get ground up into a fine meat and bone meal that is a great protein source for other feed products. But we make sure those only go to animals like chickens or pigs. rather than it being used back to ruminants. So that's just as important as making sure medications are being used properly. And we are currently trying to get our negligible risk status with the OIE, which,
What's the OIE?
part of...
I'm going to interrupt you in there just so we know what that is.
That's a good question. I'm not sure what OIE stands for, but it's basically that global body looking at the international standards for
Perfect
products.
Okay, excellent. And I was going to ask you about that, how sort of that global world fits into where we're at. So continue. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of that, in order to get that status, we have to show where we have maintained that ruminant to ruminant feed ban.
Excellent. Okay. And so then you can do that. So as you're talking about this, it's absolutely fascinating. And I know there's a lot of smart people that are working with you, because I mean, this is, when they talk about a fine science, this is a fine-tuned science. And so we talk about, so transparency, or in this case, probably more traceability, is a huge component, I would imagine, to some of the work that you're doing.
Yes. Again, part of the regulations with industry is that they have to maintain records for a certain period of time. If it contains any animal origin products, they have to keep all their records for 10 years for traceability. So if something comes up, we know where all that product's been distributed to.
Okay.
And now, as part of our regulatory modernization, we're moving to all feed products have to have their records kept for minimum of 3 years. And again, we're still going to be maintaining that 10-year requirement for any feeds containing animal products.
Okay, excellent, interesting. And I think, and I mentioned transparency a little bit as well, which that's over kind of on the consumer side a little bit with consumer trends, and we're seeing a lot of interest in transparency and that whole story of where food and how it gets to my plate. So having this conversation with you is really interesting, because along the entire value chain, there's a system, so much sophistication that's happening that we probably take a little bit for granted, as we, trust in our food system. And I know I'm at awe sometimes at how quickly the food recalls come out, or we see announcements, and we sort of think, wow, to think about the systems that are in place for that, in order for all of that to happen so quickly, is pretty fascinating from a data perspective. So that's quite interesting. We talked a little, I interrupted you there a little bit on sort of the globalization. So how does Canada work with other countries around practice and policy?
So we've got our different groups within the government that work with other foreign bodies when it comes to the whole trade aspect. So again, if a country wants to import our products, they will give us the standards that our products must meet and what we have to certify to.
Okay.
And as that comes down to the frontline staff, it provides the guidance and the direction for the inspectors to go out. Okay, this is how you're going to inspect the product. And especially for requirements that are over and above our own domestic standards. We've got really high domestic standards as well. So often there will be maybe animal health type statements that need to be certified by vets. And that's basically just saying that, Canada is free of a certain list of diseases. Mm-hmm. Or with plant health, we'll say either it's been inspected and found to be free of certain pests, or we've verified it for, say, a list of invasive weed seeds that the importing country has given us, kind of thing. So we work a lot on the trade aspect. And as we are renewing our regulations, we're in a transition period right now where we're modernizing our regulations to kind of keep up with industry and keep up with global demand. We'll look at what other systems are out there, and if we can, we'll try and align with them to make trade a little bit easier, so that we've got consistent standards with another country, and that helps trade flow a little bit easier.
And so how does the actual producer keep up with this? So if I just, if I'm getting in the business today and I'm gonna, buy my livestock, and do you have an outreach program or a department that works with producers to keep them up to speed on all of this? Or how is the actual producer educated?
So we've got our external website that we always point people to first, which is www.inspection.gc.ca. So when you go on there, there's various links that can take you to the business line that you're wanting to get into. We are also transitioning into the My CFIA portal. Unfortunately, it's not available for all business lines at this point, but we are transitioning to that, where producers can come in, they can create their own little account, and they can submit questions through there. There's also the ability for producers or industry to contact their local inspection office. Okay. And generally, when it comes to questions, that's the first thing we do is, you know what, go talk to your local inspector, because we definitely want that relationship to start being built, working with the local inspection staff. And then as they are unable to answer questions, or they need a little bit of help, then it comes to individuals such as myself or program officers in the region that can provide that little extra bit of clarity. And if need be, we'll start pulling in our programs and policy branch to make sure that we're providing the frontline inspector the information they need to help the producer and build that solid relationship between CFIA and the producer, so that as we go forward, we can make sure they know and understand the regulations that they have to meet, and their products have to be bound to. And, as they have questions, they can work with us and know that we're there to help them.
Excellent. And you're chatting, and then I get all these questions because it is quite interesting. Like I say, most of the time we're not thinking about this. So as we get into thinking a little bit more about it, and there's the complexities around it, right? There's a lot of players, there's a lot of stakeholders. And so I think we go back to that traceability and all of the components in place is quite interesting. And so if you had that crystal ball, so what does the future of food safety look like? Is it pretty standard and minor changes as you go to year, or do you see a big shift in how policy and inspection and all of that's happening today? Do you see a shift in the way that's going to happen?
Well, I think my knee-jerk reaction to that is, of course, we're going to see a shift right now because the agency is in that regulatory modernization period. So we can look at Safe Food for Canadian regulations that came into force to January 2019. So we've got those new regulations come in, and I believe we took, I think it was 14 acts and combined them into one. So we've got more cohesiveness amongst the different food groups, and better consistency with the implementation of that. Now, we've got modernizing regulations coming out for our hatcheries and supply flocks. Our feed regulations are just about to get put into Gazette 1. So that's the very beginning process of being published to bring new regulations into force. As well as we're starting to look at our seed regulations as part of the modernization kind of thing. So I think from an agency perspective, that knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, there's lots of change coming. But I would say from a consumer aspect, you're not going to see massive changes. The safety of that food is going to be maintained 100% as we roll through this. And rest assured, the safety of the food is always going to be, it's always going to improve as we go forward and we keep up with industry innovation, and allows us to react a little bit more as industry changes.
Which is perfect, because I was thinking of that. I was thinking, what's driving these changes, which is, it is enhancement, it's innovation, it's all of the tech and the data and the science that you can learn on. And I imagine some collaboration with other countries and best practices with what they're doing, and putting all of that together to continually enhance our food chain, which I think is fantastic. And I like there that your little your end piece, we'll end it there with, our confidence to consumers that, there's some smart minds like yourself that are keeping an eye on what's happening behind the scenes. So when we go to the grocery store and we buy our food, we can be confident. And I do know that, for my years in agriculture, Canada has, some of the safest, high quality, affordable food in the world. And so we can be proud of that. And we thank you for the work that you're doing to ensure that we can sit down and enjoy a wonderful dinner with our families and be safe. So thank you for that. And I thank you for taking the time to visit today. That was wonderful.